In this short video, you're just going to cover a little bit of material on Varna as a refresher, and then also layer in understandings of Jati, and there will be a discussion of the colonial creation of the modern caste system. Typically speaking, caste or caste is a form of social stratification characterized by endogamy, hereditary transmission of a style of life which often includes occupation, ritual status in a hierarchy, and customary social interaction and exclusion based upon cultural notions of purity and potential pollution. Caste is typically described in ethnographies, especially ethnographies of colonial era British Raj, South Asia. It is typically described as originating within Hindu society, although as we unpack the notions of caste described in a modern sense, you'll see that actually the colonial system of government played a role in constructing these notions. As a reminder, the Sanskrit term Varna is a word with several meanings that sort of all could be clumped together and just glossed as class. And technically it means type, order, color, as in the color association, or class. Varna is used to refer to social classes in Hindu context, especially from the Manusmriti onward. The term Varna can be broken down into 4 different Varnas, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras, and then there are also those who are Avarna, outside the Varna system. Brahmins, of course, are priests, scholars, and teachers. Kshatriyas would be rulers, warriors, and administrators. Vaishyas would be agriculturalists and merchants, whereas Shudras would be laborers and service providers. One cannot necessarily move from one Varna to another Varna, although there are families that are members of both Varnas. So, for example, in historical references, we find that very often ruling families are Brahma Kshatriyas, for example. Varna also contrasts slightly with a similar term, Jati. Jati typically is interpreted as from the root Jat, which means birth, but Jati could be a group of clans, potentially several indigenous communities grouped together as a group of tribes within the South Asian context, especially in the northeastern highlands in the Assam region. Jati could also refer to religious communities and other forms of sub-communities. Each Jati typically actually has an association with a job function or some type of ethno-linguistic classification as a minority group. Jatis also typically have a religious stream that they are associated with. So there are Jatis that are Muslim, for example. There are also Jatis that are associated with Vaishnavism or Smartism or Shaivism, for example. They might also be linguistic groupings as well. A person's surname in the modern naming constructions from the colonial period onward typically reflects a community, a Jati association, but we find this in historical texts as well, dating back to right around the Puranic period onward. So by the time that we get to the 7th, 8th, 9th century, you will find that there are individuals who are listed as historical figures who have 2 names, a family name and an individual name. To give some popular family names, for example, Gandhi refers to perfume sellers. Dhobi refers to washermen. Srivastava refers to military scribes. However, by the time of the 1901 census, The 1901 census ignores the fact that there are innumerable Jatis that actually straddle 2 or more Varnas based on their occupations. So in the 1901 census, there's a combination of Varna and Jati. As a community in South India commented, we are soldiers and saddle makers too, but it was the enumerators who decided, based upon their Varna and their Jati, which caste they would belong to. Caste, in terms of a modern conception, the way that the term is used today, really has its roots in this 1901 census. The British Raj's caste system was based on the colonial superimposition of the Portuguese word casta on the fourfold theoretical Varna system and combining that system with Jatis, but forcing each Jati into a Varna, even though there were Jati that straddled multiple Varnas. From 1901 onwards, for the purposes of the decennial census, the British classified all Jatis into one or another Varna category, and they would use associations with historical Hindu texts in an attempt to complete this process. A particularly important figure, Herbert Hope Risley, who's pictured on the right-hand side from a 1907 photograph, who was very influential in creating the census and the method of the census. He was the census commissioner, noted that, quote, the principle suggests as a basis was that of classification by social precedence as recognized by the native population, public opinion at the present day, and manifesting itself in the facts that particular castes are supposed to be the modern representatives of one or other of the castes in the theoretical Indian system. So in other words, he's basically taking contemporary groups and then forcing them into this past theoretical system and doing so for the purpose of organizing the census. Now, according to political scientists who recently passed in 2016, Lloyd Rudolph, who worked at the University of Chicago, is a member of the sort of Chicago School of South Asian Studies, and pictured in this left-hand image completing fieldwork interviews with his wife Suzanne. According to Rudolph's interpretation, Risley believed that Varna, however ancient, however past, could be applied to the modern castes found in India, and that, quote, he meant to identify and place several 100 million Indians within it. Thus, starting with the 1901 census, caste officially became India's essential institution, with an imprimatur from British colonial administrators, augmenting a discourse that had already dominated the study of South Asia. Despite the acquisition of formal political independence, furthermore, the South Asian government from 1947 onward still had not, in the words of Rudolph, quote, regained the power to know its own past and present apart from that discourse. Despite Dr. Rudolph's assessment, there are those within South Asian politics in the modern period, most notably perhaps B.R. Ambedkar, who attempted to push back on that colonial administrative notion of caste. That being said, in post-independence South Asia, the term scheduled castes and tribes becomes an official constitutional term used to give positive preferences to those castes and tribes that are scheduled, thus perceived as being socially, economically, and otherwise disadvantaged by structural discrimination, and therefore allowing those groups to receive promotions in employment, economic benefits, extra seats in university positions, and so forth. Upon independence from Britain, the Indian Constitution listed over 1,000 castes across the country as scheduled castes in 1950 for what they called positive discrimination. Basically, past discrimination had been negative discrimination, and the ruling was going to be that this was going to rectify the situation. Especially the English term untouchable communities is sometimes referred to by Gandhi's term Harijan in contemporary literature from the period, were reclassified using the term Dalit from B.R. Ambedkar or scheduled castes. In 2001, the Dalits or scheduled castes were about 16.2% of the population. That being said, there's a fair amount of caste violence that occurred from the same period. So, for example, from 2012, government records show that there are right around 650 murders, over 3,000, close to 4,000 injuries, 1,500 plus cases of rape, 490 kidnappings, and 214 cases of arson committed against members of scheduled castes, where some notion of social ranking or hierarchy was part of the crime committed. So very much a problem in contemporary South Asia today from the perspective of the Republic government. The term scheduled caste and scheduled tribes is officially used to designate numerous peoples of India. You see scheduled tribes in terms of population concentration in the map on the right, especially notable in the region of Assam, and then also up in Jammu and Kashmir, just north of that, nearby the border with Tibet. Scheduled castes over here on the left, especially concentrated in border regions up nearby Pakistan, and then in Tamil Nadu, and then border regions close to Bengal. B.R. Ambedkar took the term Dalit, meaning broken and scattered, from Sanskrit and popularized it during the 1940s and the 1950s. Now, Ambedkar was himself a Dalit and was a Dalit leader during the independence struggle, and also one of the most prominent authors of the Indian Constitution. His term also contrasts with Gandhi's term Harijan, which means person of Hari or Vishnu. And Ambedkar even criticized Gandhi for being casteist, for being prejudiced based upon caste. Ambedkar was an incredibly progressive figure in his vision and authorship of the Constitution. For example, in addition to his notion that there should be a restitution of crimes committed based upon the caste system, he also argued that he would measure the progress of community by the degree of progress which women have achieved within that community. So keep this in mind as you are reading about North Indian streams of Hinduism, and put up any questions or comments that you might have in the thread, and I'll try to answer those as promptly as possible. That's all for this week, and have a good weekend.